Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Today's guest is Alex Logan, co-founder of Cecil. Cecil is a climate tech startup that builds software for businesses that have potential impact on climate change mitigation. They raised about $2.2 million last year, and they're pretty early in their development and product stage. But it was really interesting to hear what Alex had to say about being at the forefront of the climate tech space and how they're tackling the problem in a really rapidly emerging industry. So I hope you enjoy the show, and if you like it, feel free to share and leave a review and share with family and friends. Thanks very much. Well, we'll kick off with first question. Maybe just give us a little bit of background about yourself and the business and what you do in that sort of climate tech space, and yeah, go from there.
Sure, yeah. So, going back to a little bit of my origin story, I started working while I was at university in the startup ecosystem in Sydney. So, my first foray into that was working at HelloFresh. If you were one of the fortunate people to take on one of the first 100 boxes, it might have been packed by me. So, I was working in the warehouse, got a pallet of boxes given to me. Back then, they didn't have the fancy wrapping. I was actually physically stamping each of the boxes, and even down to the sort of packaging of garlic, which I wouldn't recommend doing because it stays in your fingers for about 2 weeks later. But for me, I think the important part of that journey and getting exposed to that type of environment, I had no expectation when I did occasionally get invited into the office from the warehouse that the workplace was going to be like that. It was a fast-growing company. Everyone there was super ambitious. And that's really what drove me to get a job in startups whilst I was still at university, outside of just the warehouse work I was doing at HelloFresh. So that moved me to getting a job at BCG, now called Hey You. You might have ordered your coffee through it at some stage if you're working in the CBD. But I got the great chance to become a product manager at BCG. And for me, that was a formative experience around understanding how to build products. We knew that we could get people hooked on using the application just in the same way that they were hooked on ordering coffee. So we had great product utility, people using it twice a day, 5 days a week. There were some challenges with commercializing that type of business as well. I learned a lot about if you're taking 3.5% on an average basket size of $5, you're going to have to get a lot of orders coming through the platform. And there were challenges with bringing on venues and going to market. So I had a great early experience as a product manager, learning a lot about that, and then went on to work at Automentum, which is facilitating the transaction between the wholesaler and the retailer. So buying coffee beans off a Toby's estate as a cafe in the Sydney ecosystem. So that I joined as employee number 3, along with the 2 founders. Got the chance to build up the engineering and product team for 2 years. And that business continues to be performing really, really well as an organization. But for me personally, after working in the ecosystem for a little while, I knew that there were people building products all around the world. I knew that over in the United States, different parts of the world, people were doing what I was doing in different use cases. So I joined Boston Consulting Group Digital Ventures. And Digital Ventures was formed before we had CVCs, so corporate venture capital funds. You'll see the likes of X15 Ventures that exist now. Prior to that, people had a balance sheet in which they wanted to invest in startups. So BCG built up this capability to essentially have a startup in a box. So that, for me, coming in as a product manager, was a crazy experience. I got the chance to live in Tokyo, different parts of Southeast Asia, over in the States as well, building products for some of the largest businesses around the world. So in insurance, in construction, even as far as sort of energy and different, many different industries, I guess. So that was a great way of me not only crafting my skills as a product manager, but also very much changed my view on what type of problems I wanted to solve as a product manager. So I was exposed to a very diverse group of people around the world, including my co-founder, Rory, who I met almost 5 years ago, building an insurance business in Malaysia. And those types of experiences and understanding the diversity of thought really changed my view on what type of problems I wanted to solve with the skills that I had developed. So in thinking about, well, what are some of the biggest problems that exist in the world, climate change kept on coming up as something that I wanted to dedicate my very privileged skills towards as a product builder. So that started this process of looking at what the problems are that exist within climate as a macro problem that everyone faces every single day. Went on a long journey with my co-founder Rory on iterating on where we wanted to dedicate our skills. So our company, Cecil, what we identified, which is more true today than it was 2 or 3 years ago, was we have a shortage of supply of natural assets, nature-based solutions in mitigating climate change. That supply that we have in the world, so forests, agricultural lands, is getting completely outstripped by the demand through everyone making net zero commitments, sustainable investing. So we were fascinated by this opportunity to scale up, the opportunity to sequester carbon out of the atmosphere into these natural assets. And that led us down a pretty large path, I guess, of exploration, looking at how could we set up a fund to fund the restoration and the setup of more of these projects, through to even looking at setting up a program to bring regenerative agricultural farmers together. I think we figured out pretty quickly that no farmer was going to change their land management practices if I suggested they should move away from conventional farming into regenerative practices. So we ultimately went back to our core skills, which is to build software. And what we found out through interviewing over 100 people is that no one was building software for the operators of these assets and these projects on the supply side. And there was a massive opportunity for us to serve those customers, but more broadly serve the market in being able to scale up the amount of supply that we have around the world. So when we think about what we're working towards and what we see over the next 10 to 20 years, we see global natural capital, which is our catch-all for different types of natural assets and all the different ecosystem services around carbon, biodiversity. We see those as some of the biggest and most investable asset classes that should be emerging over the next 10 to 20 years, both with amazing climate outcomes, but we are heavily incentivized to make that a really good return on investment for institutional investors as well, to incentivize that financing. So
Alex, in terms of where you started, were you always going to go into business, or was it really about solving a problem and it just so happened that you had the skill set to go about solving that problem? So were you more sort of wanting to solve a problem, or were you always going to be an entrepreneur and in business?
Yeah, so I very vividly remember the moment when I decided I was going to go into business. And it certainly wasn't something that I'd been thinking a lot about. I mean, I had a great career, and I was very privileged to be working at BCG at the time, and was on an awesome pathway, and it had an awesome journey at BCG to that point in time. But I was driving back after meeting Rory in Byron to have another discussion around what these opportunities were, and there was just a fire in my stomach that I hadn't felt for a very, very long time. So it was me in many ways thinking with my stomach as opposed to thinking with my brain, and thinking through a thought process or a mental model to get to the point of going into business. And I think that, I mean, in retrospect, it probably might look obvious that I was doing all this stuff in startups and I was building products and getting exposed to all these different things, but ultimately I hadn't planned to do it. And it came down to more of a gut feeling to guide me into making that decision.
Yeah. And so had you, up until that stage, did you mapped out your career down that product management sort of from when you first started? You're obviously interested in startups and tech, and you've sort of gone down that path of product management, which lends itself really well to where you've ended up. But was that deliberate in terms of how you mapped out your career up until then?
Yeah, I think when I think about some of the biggest decisions that I made, becoming a product manager was one of the biggest decisions that I made, and led to a lot of opportunities over the last 5 to 10 years. But in making that decision, it kind of happened serendipitously as well. So when I go back to, I speak about being a product manager at Beat the Cube, but I became a product manager at Beat the Cube. When I first started there, I was doing a lot of different things. I mean, I think I was probably an EA to founders. I was doing marketing. I was selling venues. I was turning up in the CBD at 6 a.m. to hand out flyers. Like there was lots of things that I was just tasting and trying to get a feel for. I even did a course on sort of data and looked at like how I could, I mean, I haven't used MySQL like this whole time in my career, but like there were lots of different points of exploration. So even that decision came down to like a moment where we had some agile consultants come into the business. And for me, that signified like an opportunity to take on some responsibility in owning the process of building the product that I hadn't been exposed to. So I took that on. I got along really well, and they gave me a lot of opportunities, the team that came in, to advise us on how to build products better. And there are other elements that I hadn't really realized that like I had those attributes. So like I often talk about when I was younger, I played a lot of sport. And when you're younger and playing sport, typically, like if you're the best player, you end up being the captain in many ways. You end up like getting that responsibility. But it ends up being quite toxic, because if you are the captain and then someone else plays better than you, it's almost like they're challenging you for your role. There was this weird sense of leadership that came with, like, I knew that I was never going to be better than the engineers at their craft. I was never going to be better than the designers. So my natural fit into like taking on almost more of a servant leadership role like was shaped for me in that experience. And like I just became accustomed to that. So yeah, there were many factors as to how to get into product management, a lot of curiosity, but then some moments where I took on some, I guess, like some bigger decisions that sort of paid off.
And in terms of when you then moved to BCG Digital, now to be clear for everyone listening, that's Boston Consulting Group's digital ventures arm, right? So there you're making tech startups and products for large corporates, right?
Correct. Yeah. So Boston Consulting Group, which is the management consulting firm, it's a fascinating story as to how digital ventures even came to life. But effectively, as I mentioned before, we see a lot of investments, incubators coming out of corporates these days. Very common for them to be using and investing in innovation through a venture capital arm or through an innovation hub, I guess. Before that, there weren't the core skills. I mean, the types of people that are working for digital ventures were people like myself, skilled workers, as opposed to traditionally BCG has generalists coming in to do work. So we had in the teams at Digital Ventures, engineers, designers, product managers, commercial team members that were forming these small teams, almost pseudo startup teams that were looking to bring more of a multidisciplinary approach into these organizations to take an idea and then either validate it, build up a business case, and then take it to market. So it was almost startup in a box for a lot of these corporates, which have now brought in some of that thinking in-house, but it remains to be served by people like Digital Ventures as well.
And in terms of this whole process, especially you've got different skill sets as you go along that you develop, and you've got the product manager skill set, but then you go into being a founder. What would you say your biggest strength is in all of this, and how does it help you sort of succeed?
Yeah, so fortunately, I guess as a product manager, what I like to draw parallels between is in the role of a product manager, you're incentivized to get the team working really collaboratively and really effectively together. And you measure that through the amount of times you release new features to customers. There's always like the I guess the metrics that define success through product are often tied to really important milestones, whether it's, hey, we just released a new feature, or we got data back that customers really like this. So there's almost this mandate of hitting milestones and making progress. And that translates really well to being a founder. I think that what people are looking for at this early stage of the business is someone who can define what needs to get done and hit those milestones, whether it's get your first customer, get your first paying customer. So what has translated really well for me, I think, is that laser focus on breaking things down into smaller milestones and making progress has translated really well into being a founder.
Yeah, okay. And what about weaknesses? What this is where probably co-founders come in. But what about weaknesses? What is your stumbling block, and how do you overcome it?
Yeah, I think, just reflecting on that strength, which is like laser focused. I can tell you in between now and the next 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, exactly what we're going to deliver on. And like, I have a lot of extreme confidence around how we've coordinated the team in a way that we're going to hit those milestones. I think what's often missing and what's really important for a founder is to be inspirational. I mean, you're defining new categories, you're defining new markets. You have to project out 6 months, 12 months, 10 years from now and have clarity on what that's going to look like. And fundamentally, as a product manager, although you have product visions and et cetera, you're much more focused on just making progress and accumulating a lot of bits of progress to get to a bigger goal. So yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, I partnered with my co-founder, Rory, who is much more, empathetic towards what that bigger picture needs to be, what that vision needs to be for our organization. And I think it ends up being there's certainly tensions at time of, well, we need to focus on this. Like, we need our customers to get access to this feature, but what is the bigger picture? And should we take some more time to think about where we're going and what we're looking to do in the future?
Because you've got to have both, right? You've got to have that big picture vision that inspires everyone to where you're going. And you've also got to execute every single day on the little milestones. So there is that sort of yin and yang between the two, right? And it's not often that you have people have both of those skill sets as their strength.
Yeah, I talk a lot about our relationship and the founder relationship that we have. And as I mentioned before, we've known each other for 4 to 5 years. So we have a really deep understanding of each other, going beyond the level of simply what we're really good at and what skill sets we have. So that deeper level of understanding, I think, translates to a lot of confidence in what our roles and responsibilities are. We talk a lot about this. We actually have a dedicated session each week called Founders Forum, which is a lot more about the EQ side of our relationship. And we've invested in that because even as you say, if you find the right combination between two people who have a lot of synergies, there's so many other elements to the founder relationship that I think are just crucial to get you through the highs and lows of the journey that you're going through together. So we invest in that a whole heap, which I think has paid off in many examples today.
And how long has the business been going for now? Is it 12 months?
Yeah, so just a little over 12 months, probably coming up to closer to 18 months now. But yeah, we were obviously thinking about this idea for a longer period before that.
And you've just done a seed round recently?
Yeah, so we did a pre-seed round at the end of last year, and that was a round that we found was quite strategic. So obviously the category that we are creating within nature-based solutions is specific to the climate opportunity over the next 10 to 20 years. So we've naturally, I think, gravitated towards people who have a very similar thesis to us on where the world is going in the next 10 to 20 years. So our partners in that pre-seed round were Tenacious Ventures, which is a local agricultural climate-focused fund, MacDoc Family Office, and then Global Founders Capital.
Yeah, okay. And in terms of, as you've gone through that process over the last 12 months, what would be the best decision you've made in that short time as you've gone along? And no doubt there's lots and lots of decisions along the way, but what would you, looking back in that short time, what would you say would be the best decision you've made so far? Hard to answer because you may not find out what the best decision was for a few years to come. You might have to review it, but what stands out at the moment?
Look, I think one of the best decisions we've probably continued to make is what is the right problem for us to solve. And sometimes I think there's an overwhelming amount of things for a founder to consider, and there's an overwhelming amount of opportunities that exist. But I think what I'm most proud of and what's probably set us up for most success is being what is the right thing for us to solve. So to make that a bit more tangible, I spoke to the opportunities around setting up a fund or bringing together a number of different landholders into a program, of which I think that in the longer run over the next 10 years, well, we're going to be the right people to to run that business? Potentially not. So to come back to our core, which is building software to engage as many people as possible within this space, and search for problems that we know how to solve. I think that's what's going to set us up for success, because we are world class in doing that as individuals and now as a team, albeit there are other exciting opportunities that we could have pursued. So I think coming back to everything that we learned, like what were the things over the last, done a lot of reflecting on my career, because it's the origin story that you tell everyone when you start to introduce them to Cecil. And I think more and more I become bullish on the things that we're solving are the right things for us to be solving, and the team that we're building is the right team to solve those problems. So I think we're in a good place from that perspective.
How many people in the team now?
Yeah, so we recently went on a retreat up just outside of Armidale. So there were 6 of us at that retreat, but then there's a number of contractors. In fact, Rory, my co-founder, is actually based in Europe at the moment doing a lot of sales. But team of sort of 10 to 12 with a cross-section of product managers, designers, strategy and ops team member, and a number of engineers.
Yeah, okay. So what's the biggest mistake you've made so far that you had to sort of reverse or realize pretty quickly? I imagine in this sort of space, and being as experienced you are in the product management side, you understand how quickly and how important it is to quickly change course when you've made a mistake. But is there anything that stands out as something that you've had to adjust really quickly and you just got wrong?
Yeah, got a lot of things wrong. I think that at times we've strayed away from potentially where we're at as a business. It's an interesting thing as a founder. And what I mean by that is that we either got carried away with trying to position ourselves 6 months ahead of where we actually are. And not to say that we misconstrued the business or what we were doing, but you get caught up in chasing things that people might be looking for in your business. And ultimately, you need to stay true to where you were at as a business and focus back in on that. So I think there's a lot of temptations. One of the mistakes that we made is we generated some early revenue. And that came through really more of a willingness to pay and a need for the product, as opposed to any sort of like sales and marketing attributes. I mean, I met the first customer who is still a customer of ours in a restaurant when I was telling everyone about soil carbon, and he's the CEO of an amazing business in Australia that's doing the largest soil carbon developer in Australia. Turned around and sort of asked me what I was chatting to all these people at the dinner table about, and then it ended up being an amazing relationship. So we like sort of brought them on as a customer, and they paid for the service that we provided to them. So in the example of then going to market and looking at capital raising, I mean, we had revenue, so we were beyond being a pre-revenue organization, which to me, we hadn't gone out to market or even gone from a sales perspective and looked at that. So it just meant that then we positioned people to ask questions that wasn't really relevant to us. We'll focus on finding product market fit as opposed to representing a sales and go-to-market like sort of strategy. Yeah. So I think there's nuance in like just being able to take check and peace of mind around where you actually are as a business.
Yeah.
Really, really clearly.
And just in terms of the nuance of that, I gather what you're getting at is you had the opportunity to bring a paying customer on, so you did that, but then that sort of skews metrics a little bit around different things, because it looks like then if you're not pursuing that aggressively at that point, which you, like you say, you're really pre-revenue at that point, and sort of happened to fall in your lap, but then when you're talking to people and you've only got a small amount of revenue, they wonder why. But you weren't pursuing that, it just so happened. So that mixes up the story a bit. Is that sort of what you're getting at in terms of
exactly
sort of walk before you run type thing, I guess?
Yeah, and it was statistically insignificant what we were doing. The things that we were obsessed with, and at times we probably weren't obsessed with them because we're getting pulled in different directions. But the way that I tell it now is that for the first 6 months of launching that product, we were obsessed with those customers, and we were looking to try to ensure that they were logging in every single day and we were adding value to them. So we were searching for signs of product market fit through these early adopters that we had in the platform. And that obsession has flourished now into some of the things that we see in the product. But at the time, it was hard for me to recognize that that's where we were in the business because of a lot of the conversations that we were having. So yeah, it can be really tough, and yeah, you make mistakes in focus or taking on the right opportunity as a founder.
Yeah, right. And in terms of the best advice you've ever been given, what stands out, and what advice would you give someone who was starting out?
Yeah, I think the best advice, I think that I probably take a step back and think about some advice I got much earlier in my career, probably even before my career had started. I sort of hinted at this before, but I was pretty passionate about playing sports when I was younger. I think I had all sorts of dreams of playing and representing my country or representing my state or representing all of these types of levels within different sports. And ultimately, I pursued that post being at school whilst I was at university. And one of the best learnings that I had through that was being supported and learning to fail. And that was a really early part of my career and it's led to incredible things, right? Like it was at that point that I started working at HelloFresh, and then I started working at BBQ. So there was some interesting things that went on, but that learning in itself, like classic sort of quote, but came sort of from my mum in just really being like quite truthful and honest with me about what was going on. I think I was still gung-ho on like this vision that I had, but I had to learn that like maybe that wasn't going to happen and that was okay. And like it wasn't through effort, it wasn't through willingness, but it was about where I was putting my energy, and to fail at that and then to step away from that experience, I think was something that was really, really important for me and has made me capable of doing that in different scenarios around life.
Yeah, well, the best advice always comes from mums, that's for sure. And out of interest, what sports were you pursuing at that stage?
Yeah, so played many different sports when I was younger, but chose cricket as the one that I was going to try and play after school. So had some formative years and developed some great relationships at Sydney University playing cricket post school, and then before that played a lot of rugby, did a lot of swimming. But yeah, it was just the classic younger Australian guy who just spent all weekend traveling around Sydney and doing all different activities out in the sun.
Yeah, good stuff. What about business people that inspire you, and why? Is there anyone that stands out?
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point in time, there's been a lot of really awesome people that I've met along the journey. But I think when I think about what inspires me most at this point in time, I mean, I've just been blown away by the team that I brought on board. Like that is almost my source of inspiration at the moment as a founder, which is such a privilege to have that opportunity to build this team over the last even just 3 to 6 months. I mean, I can speak to some of the experiences. We were away on the retreat, and when you get this right and you hire the right team into an organization, it's almost as if Rory and I were a bit timid over the last 12 months because the opportunities that our team were talking about and the way in which they were pushing us to be more opinionated about what we could do as an organization just filled me with so much energy and inspiration around like what was actually possible now that we have a team of 10 people who are all really passionate about adding to the vision that we have and how ambitious we can be. I think beyond that, being in the position of having product managers join the team and seeing how quickly they are transitioning into being world-class product managers, and to see that like over the course of even just 3 months, I mean, yeah, almost like at times makes me feel a bit emotional about how crazy it is to see them like grow in that rapid rates in the organization we have. So yeah, I think I take a lot of inspiration from the team that we've formed in this organization today.
And I get that, because that's one of the coolest things about seeing a young team come together, or whether they're young or not doesn't really matter. But I think sport, and I've coached quite a bit of basketball and that sort of stuff, and my young blokes team at a relatively high level, and you see people come together in small teams and what they can achieve and how they work together, and it applies just the same to business. It is great to see, because you see the growth in people, right? In different circumstances, in adversity, when things get tough, that's when you really get to see the cool stuff people come up with.
It's whether it's the ideas that they come up with, or just quite literally seeing them tackling things that, like 3 months ago, if you'd asked them how to think about writing a back-end ticket with API development, I think it would have felt like an alien concept to them. But now logging in every morning, having them working on this, and just, it really comes back to, I think, the key to success that I found through this early team was, like, we were indexing towards curiosity in that interviewing process as opposed to experience. So particularly, I mean, we were fortunate in the sense that with all of my experience in product, we had great processes in place. We had things were working like a well-oiled machine with a remote team that works around the clock in different parts of the world. But then to see the people that came in, like they didn't need to have the experience of having done that in the past. They were just so curious about it, and the energy that brings to the team once they join, to figure out how it works and to think about how it might be done differently. I think that aspect of individuals just scores so highly on being able to make a difference in an organization.
Yeah. So curiosity is key. If they want to join you and your team, curiosity is the key. Good stuff. What about business books? What's the best one you've ever read? Do you read much in terms of that sort of stuff, or you prefer to do things rather than read?
I think I wish I had more time to read at the moment. I think that it's one of those, I think a lot of people feel this way, but I do my best work when I'm reading books. And that probably leads me to the book that one of the books that spurred me into being a product manager. So it's called, it's the art, I think it's I've got it written down here, Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time. So it's a Scrum book. It's very almost technical book, but I mean, it just transformed my view of going back to what my strengths are, learning those skills of getting things done, all the incredible experiences that people have had in launching products to market, digital products in particular, has just culminated to this amazing philosophy of getting stuff done, and how well that's translated into what I do today as a founder. That is something that sticks out. I think the other one that I've been reading recently is Secrets of Sand Hill Road, which gives you a great insight into how venture capital works. I think that being a first-time founder, I only picked up that book a few months ago. I wish I picked it up 18 months ago. I read it now, and I'm like, whoa, I know that, but I wish that I'd almost found out that in advance of going through the experience. But that's another one that I'd highly recommend as a book for getting involved, particularly in this space.
Because there's so many things you got to learn for the first time, right? Which is on that side, things of the financing side. It's a whole different ballgame, especially if you're not from that background, In terms of a favorite quote or anything like that, business, leadership, life, anything along those lines, anything that that stands out for you?
Yeah, I think, and this again is contextual to the journey that I've been on. I think it is what we do a lot of in today's day and age is connecting the dots on things retrospectively. So we look back at the success of, how many unicorns have sprung up, and looking at all of these different models for how people grew this business, or we did this really well. And often I think what I find we're lacking in the world is a perspective of how to deal with not having those answers, and how people got through the point of not being able to connect the dots. And it's actually Steve Jobs who talks a lot about this. It's easy to look back and connect the dots once you've done something and once you've launched a business. And I can tell you about all the things that I did right or wrong over the last 12 months. But most of the time, when you don't have those dots connected in the future, you have to rely on your gut, your instincts, what is really driving you beyond just the logic of someone else's journey. So I love thinking about putting myself in that situation, because it means that I'm deliberate in what I'm reading. I'm deliberate in like, and also just I talk a lot about normalizing things, particularly within our team, like normalizing the ambiguity as opposed to normalizing reading this book that tells you about this. I mean, our team's been reading a lot of The Cold Star Problem by Andrew Chen, which is a great book on network effects. And there's definitely value in the way in which they talk to the anecdotes of creating network effects. But I also encourage the team to think a lot about ambiguity and being okay and normalizing not having the answer. And also, frankly, some of the really good advice I got from someone in my network not that long ago was the best metrics to bring this to life, right? So, I mean, SaaS metrics are overdone, right? Like everyone knows that they're not vanity metrics really. Like ARR is a real metric for growth and where your business is at and the health of the business. But just setting a metric of let's get to 1 million ARR, I mean, that's almost a bit of a vanity metric because what's the insight that's actually going to get you to that point in time in the journey?
Yeah.
What we have been spending a lot of time on as a team is thinking about what are the Cecil metrics, not what are the metrics that the market will judge us by, but what are those metrics that drive our business? And ultimately, we need to attach those to revenue generating metrics and things that are going on. But the most insightful metrics from a business often are really bespoke. And there's something about your business and some sort of lever that you're pulling that allows you to get up to that metric. And that's what you should be obsessed over, as opposed to coming in every day and saying, are we any closer to like 1 million ARR? No,
Some
we're not.
arbitrary sort of number, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So what's next for the business? What's in the next few years, or what's coming up next year? Presumably now you do your next phase, and then you've got another capital raising, no doubt, at some point that you sort of want to lock in, and then beyond that. So what's the next steps?
Yeah, I think what I'm most excited about at the moment is some of the momentum that we have within the business that I think is bringing forward a lot of the things that we thought we were going to be doing in 6 to 12 months. So the obsession over and some of the dynamics that we see within the product that we're building gets us really excited for accelerating what that could look like in commercializing other parts of the business, but then also just in being able to get and hit those metrics of bringing more people into our ecosystem faster. So I think there's plenty of exciting dynamics, and it's a result of, as I said before, being very focused on our strengths, which is how do we encourage more people to get to log in every single day. There's constantly things that our customers want us to build, and it's getting wider and wider, and we're adding more and more value. So I think just that executional aspect, I mean, I'm coming back to the product manager stuff. What gets me excited, right? Like there's those aspects of what get me super excited. And I think that's going to put us in good stead to be building a defensible business over the next 10 to 20 years. I think though, more at a macro level, what I get excited about is what we're seeing in the markets. And I think we'll only see more of it if products like Cecil exist and there's robust investment data sitting behind these assets. But I get super excited about the amount of interest we are seeing in making investments into nature. When we think about the future state of where natural assets as an asset class are going, like we have extreme confidence that it's going to be through like a capital activations opportunity. So we need to make this the most valuable asset class to institutional investors over the next 10 to 20 years. And there are a lot of signs to say that their portfolio opportunities of investments are shrinking around the climate impacts of grey assets and other types of high carbon assets. Therefore, their willingness to look at these natural assets, such as forests, that have tremendous benefits beyond just a return on investment as an investor, but the climate impacts. I mean, those types of dynamics in the numbers, I mean, it almost gets embarrassing about, you look at McKinsey is valuing natural capital at over $1 trillion. Like it's just, it's amazing to see the recognition of the scale of which we can get these markets over the next 10 to 20 years. But I think the contrarian view would be if we don't, in the absence of better data, higher quality data, that money isn't going to move into this space over the next 10 to 20 years. So it comes back to the challenge that we're faced with. But yeah, tremendous opportunity, I think, for institutional investors to get involved in this type of asset class.
And just one last question before we go. In terms of the conflict in Ukraine and the change in the world around well, commodities in general and energy and all of those different things, does this, presumably in the long term, it makes the case for what you guys do stronger? What does it do in the short term? Does it create any issues? What's the impact been that you can see, or can you see any impact from just change in sentiment around, from that conflict and all that it brings with it?
Yeah, look, I can't speak to too many tangible impacts, and maybe it's just through like our natural elements of the exposure that we have. So I haven't certainly felt that. All I do know is that there's been a continuation of announcements of people who are investing in nature and getting into these types of contracts. So mid to long term, what that impact is, I haven't felt any tangible things for our business. I think there's a couple of elements as to why. I think a lot of the teams that we're working with at the moment are already in agreements and are working on operating these assets that someone has made an investment into. And I don't think those geopolitical aspects have impacted the like onset of financing right now. I do think that there could be challenges. I'd like to think that even through those geopolitical aspects, there's going to be a recognition of this just being a really good investment opportunity, irrespective of that, as an attribute of natural assets. But no doubt, particularly at the commodities level, what type of constraints is that going to put on these markets? Yeah, I think that there could be some potential impact there over time.
Okay, excellent. Mate, great insights. Thanks for coming on the show and sharing your story. And we look forward to seeing what you guys do next.
Thanks for having me.